So now, as you know, the new game for the establishment, the billionaire class that runs the world and doesn't care about the United States whatsoever, their new game is to criminalize their political opponents. And we've explained to you over and over how they're not only doing it in the United States, but Pakistan, Brazil, and now in the United States, they're doing it not only with Donald Trump, but with the black socialists, the Uhuru, I think they're called. They're also doing it to Stop Cop City protesters in Atlanta, people protesting the expansion of the police state. They're criminalizing who's ever standing up against the establishment. And that's what they're doing right now to Donald Trump. And you don't have to like Donald Trump or vote for him. I'm not voting for Donald Trump. I never did. But to see that what they're doing to him, they'll do to anybody who stands up against the establishment in a meaningful way. And the donor class in the Republican Party and the donor class for the Democratic Party, which is the same people, they hate Donald Trump with a passion. Now, there's a lot of theories about that. And one of them is he tells the truth about war and he won't do the wars like they want him to. And another one is he puts an ugly face on the imperialism, so it makes it harder to do that stuff. Doesn't matter why. He's definitely an enemy of the donor class, and now they're criminalizing him, and they're doing these frivolous lawsuits, and it's only making people lose faith in the judicial system and their institutions even further. It's not, so the Supreme Court has now decided to delay one of those cases, and that Donald Trump won't have to face a trial over it until after the election. Election he'll most likely win. So then he can't be taken into court because you can't take a president to court for crimes until that has to be done in the Senate and the House. If he's committed a crime, the House and the Senate have to convict him. Well, the Senate never convicted Donald Trump of a crime. So now they are losing their minds. Who's they? The same people who lied to you about COVID. The same people who lied to you about the vaccines. The same people who lied to you about mandates. The same people who lied to you about masks. The same people who lied to you about lockdowns. The same people who lied to you about transmission. The same people who lied to you about contraction. The same people who lied to you about the Syria war. The same people who lied to you about the Libyan war. The same people who lied to you about Ukraine. The same people who lied to you about forced to vote. All those people are now losing their minds. Because the way democracy is supposed to work, it's working. The Supreme Court is doing what they want to do. That's why they're given lifetime appointments. And now that the Supreme Court says Donald Trump doesn't have to face this criminal trial until after the election, this is what people like Rachel Maddow are saying, which sounds to me like she's undermining democracy. Let's listen.
Think about the court as the Supreme Court of the United States and a rational actor and a decent one. That was a reasonable supposition, and it just turns out they're not that. Incremental bit of progress here. The important question here is not whether the Supreme Court is going to decide.
By the way, she's saying the Supreme Court is not reasonable. The same Supreme Court, by the way, that upheld Obamacare. They're not, you would think they'd be because crazy partisans. They upheld Obamacare. That's the same Supreme Court that she now says is not reasonable. Okay, here we go.
Donald Trump and all presidents are immune from prosecution for things crimes they committed while they were president. I mean, it would be fully insane for them to actually side with Trump here, right? The conclusion that we can arrive at now based on what they have done without having to wait for the ruling is that they are ensuring that Trump will not face trial. And when they inevitably rule that presidents aren't immune from prosecution after they leave office, what that will tell Donald Trump, if by then he is president, is that he can never leave the office of the presidency.
Right.
And if he is voted out in 2028, he cannot leave office, and he is willing to he is welcome to commit any crimes he wants to, as long as he is still president, in order to ignore the result of that election and stay in power for life, because otherwise he's going to go to prison when he gets out.
Now, the reason why Rachel Maddow can say crazy things like that, is because she's been saying crazy things like that ever since 2016, and she's got paid no price for it. And she's been rewarded with a $35 million contract, which is over $500,000 a week. That's over $100,000 a day. She gets paid for stuff like that. And what that's called is fearmongering. What she's saying is that somehow Donald Trump, if he becomes president, will then become a dictator, and he'll be able to run things like Mao in China did, and he'll never leave office. Forgetting the fact that he would need the complete support of the military to do something like that, which that wouldn't happen. He couldn't even get his own fucking vice president to go along with him protesting the election results last time, let alone the entire military. We have a system of checks and balances. And this fear-mongering that they're doing at MSNBC to try to scare people into believing that somehow if Donald Trump becomes president again, he'll never leave. The guy who left willfully last time, no problem, walked right out of it when he lost the election, they're now saying he'll somehow be able to retain power for. So the only reason why Barack Obama still isn't president, or Nixon, is because they just decided to leave. The reason why Reagan isn't still president and George Bush isn't still president and Barack Obama is just because they were nice enough to leave office. Because apparently the president can just stay for as long as he wants. According to liar Rachel Maddow, and what we've just... So some of you maybe grew up during like 4 seasons of weather. If you grew up in Chicago, we had 4 seasons of weather, and you were taught the technique that in the winter and it's snowing, you're supposed to steer into the skid. It doesn't work when that skid is made of shit. And that's on Rachel, literally. That's a shit skid. This is like that naked guy in the mental institution who's wearing the Napoleon hat telling the white coats that they're both crazy and to escort him back to his room. And somehow, this is what it is. And of course, you have to remember, they hired a lesbian because a gay person would never lie to you like this. Well, gay people don't lie, do they? Disney cartoons don't lie. She's a full-blown maniac, out of her mind. This is unhinged, what this is. And they say Donald Trump is going to wreck democracy if he's elected. What is that called? She couldn't be trying to undermine democracy more. Let me throw it over. I have one more video, by the way. That's even. Let me play it. It's only 48 seconds. Watch this.
The reason why people like Mark and people like Dahlia seem to have a crystal ball is because they're real, because they're realists, and they understand the court for what it is. And at some point, people in the media, people at home, and people sitting in the White House have to stop pretending that the Supreme Court is some kind of benign, trying to do its best institution, and start to realize that there are 6 Republicans, not conservatives, Republicans on the Supreme Court who view it as their job to help the Republican Party. And until we do something about that, until we take away that power, until we draw the line on them there, they will continue to do this. They will help Trump. They will take away abortion rights. They will end affirmative action. They will liberalize gun rights. They will do all of it until we stop them. And
so what does he mean by us stopping? Imagine if thou flip the script. Imagine if it was a majority Democrat Supreme Court, and there was a Republican saying they're going to do what they want with guns. They're going to do what they want with abortion. They're going to do what they want. What was the third thing he said? Affirmative action. They're going to institute affirmative action. They're going to institute abortion rights. And they're going to take away our guns. We've got to stop them. The Supreme Court is not legitimate, which is what he's saying. So now the people who, again, I've said this and I'll keep saying it, every accusation they make about Trump is a confession. When they say Donald Trump is going to take away your democracy, that's what these people want to do. When they say Donald Trump doesn't respect journalism, they're the ones killing Julian Assange and censoring journalists on social media. Yeah. When they say Donald Trump is going to have his finger on the button, they're the ones who are stoking wars with nuclear powers. These are the people who are funding a genocide. So go ahead.
If you notice, the liberal class, the liberals, they are much more comfortable making violent threats, even as they accuse Republicans of the ones who make violent threats. LeVar Burton went on stage at a reading event. Are there any members of Moms of Liberty here? Oh, good. I won't have to throw hands. But can you imagine if a Republican went out there and said that? They'd be all over it because they know that the media is not going to go after them when they say things like that. It's the classic fiery but peaceful protests. They are constantly, now whether you feel those protests, that was on CNN infamously during the Black Lives Matter protest. Now, whether or not you support those protests, they very much impose a double standard of any threats of violence, any expression of violence is by definition, it's wrong. It's a threat to democracy, except when they do it. When causes they like, when groups they see as supportive of their politics or their political party do things like that, it is a completely different story. And with Rachel Maddow, she's just built a career on scaring the shit out of people in nursing homes. That's really who actually watches this. I think the last I saw, I don't know what the numbers are now. The last I saw, MSNBC, 68 is the average age of a person watching it. Unfortunately, those people vote. And that is why somebody like Maddow has the impact that she has. It's a very small number of people in society who actually look at Rachel Maddow and take her seriously. But it's a group of people that vote in disproportionately large numbers.
Yeah, if I could just add, in response to those videos, it's just so Orwellian because the judicial branch seems to be the only branch of government now that takes its constitutional responsibilities even remotely seriously, even remotely to heart. That's not to say they are perfect. Of course, the Supreme Court has a lot of issues going on. You have Thomas taking bribes from Harlan Crow, who was one of Cornel West's top donors, incidentally, as well. But I believe that what Maddow was saying there when she says, well, they know they're going to have to rule against Trump anyway, so they're just trying to grant him time so that he can maybe get the trial canceled if it's after November. That's because the Supreme Court understands the hell that will be unleashed upon this country if Donald Trump is convicted of a crime during campaign season. Like, they actually fear that because they are actually invested in the stability of these constitutional institutions, these constitutional structures, the functioning of our democratic, quote unquote, government. They're actually invested in that. They actually have the foresight to understand that that will all come crumbling down if a jury actually decides to lock up Donald Trump during the campaign. And they know that will be very bad for the country. The Democrats don't care about that. They are fully scorched earth at this point. They know Biden cannot win, and they know that desperate times call for desperate measures. And so they are desperate to settle this some other way. But it's actually the court who seems to be understanding most of, certainly more than the Senate or the House. Hey, what's going to happen in this country if we actually try to throw Donald Trump in jail this year? That's going to be really horrible. That's going to be a horrible thing for this country to go through. And they seem to be acting like they understand that, which is more than I could say for the other two branches.
Well, maybe it's because the Supreme Court really, after you're on the Supreme Court, you're on there for life. So you don't have to worry about running for office again, and you don't have to worry about getting donor cash. And maybe they just act on their own partisan or their own political leanings and the law. And instead of
a lot of these guys, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Instead of the wishes of the donor class. So that doesn't really factor into what they're doing. What does factor in is the law and their own politics. But you can't really say, so maybe that's why they're able to act sensibly, way more sensibly than the politicians controlled by the donor class. Go ahead, Keaton.
I was about to say also, it takes a lot of seriousness to actually ascend to the Supreme Court. I mean, you had, Thomas, you could argue, doesn't have any business on the court, but other than him, I mean, how many people got onto the Supreme Court because their father was on the Supreme Court or their uncle was on the Supreme Court? In the House and the Senate, we see that all the time, right? Governors, right? George W. Bush became governor of Texas. He wouldn't have been that if his father, right, wasn't who he was. The Supreme Court's a much more serious set of people who actually, I think, do take a certain degree of pride in what they do, which is why, as you mentioned earlier, Jimmy, they upheld Obamacare. If they were partisan Republican actors, they would have struck that down. That was an incredibly unserious lawsuit that was brought by, I believe, the state of Texas. This was a couple years ago by now. And they voted, I think, 7-2 to toss that. Now, if they were Republican partisans and all they cared about was sticking it up the Democrats' ass every chance they could, they wouldn't have ruled that way, right? I mean, I think for all of the problems of the Supreme Court, they are the most serious about their duty within the constitutional system because they understand it best. That's why they're on the Supreme Court, right? As opposed to, Joe Kennedy III, who got elected to the House because of his name. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have that much of that on the court. I don't know if you have any of it. I don't know. I'm not a historian, but I can't think of anybody. Right? There are legacy admissions on the Supreme Court, Russell. Do you know of anybody who's like, oh, yeah, his father was on the court, now he's on it? I don't think that's happened.
No, but I will say this. We thought that about the Supreme Court, and then Bush v. Gore came to the court. And we saw how quickly, when it came to presidential politics, they ruled exactly according to which party's president had chosen them. It completely broke down that way. And
that's why I'm saying it's not beyond corruption, but it doesn't compare to the House or the
I will say this: as much as MSNBC and Maddow, it really doesn't matter what the facts are. Their conclusions are always going to be the same. Why is the Supreme Court taking up what I am forced to agree seems like a no-brainer? Like, is the court really going to even consider the idea that no laws constrain the president? Really? So I think it is fair to consider the idea that they wanted to hold up this case until after the election.
I think they do. That's what I said, but I don't think they want to hold it up so that Trump wins. I think they want to hold it up because they understand the consequences of convicting a presidential candidate in the middle of a campaign cycle. That alone will do so much more damage to our democratic system than what they're doing now, right? James Comey didn't prosecute in 2016 because he said he didn't want to interfere with the race.
That's right.
He said there's evidence that she mishandled the email server, but there may be evidence of violations of the Espionage Act, which they're torturing Julian Assange for supposedly violating now, even though he's not. He said, even though there's evidence there, we're not going to go there. And part of the reason he gave for that, first, he said we couldn't establish intent, which is nonsense. If there's one person on earth who knew what she should have been doing with that information, it was her. But he said we didn't do it because we didn't want to indict the Democratic nominee 4 months before the vote, because that's going to cause chaos within the democratic system that could cause irreparable harm. It's a prudence thing. That's what they're doing. They're showing prudence.
We both agree they took the case only to hold it past the election. So in the end, I hate to tell you, we agree with Rachel Maddow.
Well, I said, yes, they're pushing it past the election, but I would say they're not doing it purely for partisan reasons. They're doing it because they understand the structural damage that this country would incur if you actually lock Donald Trump in jail between now and November.
James Comey, I'll never forget that press conference where he came out and he said, this is going to sound crazy in at least a couple of different ways.
He came out, I remember that was July 5th, 2016. We were all on the Bernie train at that point. Yes. He comes out and he talks for 15 minutes about how guilty Hillary Clinton is. I thought, oh my God, they're actually going to indict her. Maybe Bernie's got a shot. And then after 15 minutes of laying out just how guilty she is, he says, but we don't find evidence of intent. And so we don't think any reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. I'm like, what?
He said he found over 100 emails with classified information on them, 36 email chains with classified email chain on it. But
he said any reasonable person should have known not to handle it this way. So Hillary Clinton's not a reasonable person. She's one of 5 people on earth, who was, best equipped to know that was classified. And yet he says he couldn't establish intent. But what I'm saying is the reason he did that is because he didn't want to throw a wrench into the electoral process
Right.
that late in the game. And I think the Supreme Court's acting this way for the exact same reason.
And so here is a MSNBC legal analyst, Barb McQuaid. She says the right to a speedy trial belongs to the public as well as the defendant. Efforts to bring a case to trial promptly is not election interference. The community notes, which is corrupt, but I think they got it right this time. She got community noted on that. And they say the Sixth Amendment affords only the accused the right to a speedy trial. The public enjoys no such right. And they link to the Constitution. So the MSNBC is not news. And it breaks my heart I know lots of people who think it is. A lot of people in the comedy community in Los Angeles think that MSNBC and CNN are the news. My ex-roommate, sweetheart of a guy, I love him. He said to me, Rachel Maddow's beyond reproach. This is what they think. That's a direct quote. This is what these people, they think that Fauci is not a liar. I have to explain to them. Do you remember that movie, The Dallas Buyers Club? Do you remember that movie? What's the guy who was the...
That was Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Do you remember that? Do you know who the bad guy in that movie was? The bad guy was Dr. Fauci. Everybody forgets about that, including Matthew McConaughey. Nobody wants to bring that up. Nobody wants to make that case that, hey, it was Dr. Fauci who was keeping life-saving medicine from AIDS patients. And they had to do all these so much so that they made a movie about it that I think he won the Oscar for.
He did.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but they still, because they're told, it's amazing the power of propaganda. That, Chomsky wasn't kidding, and Ed Herman, when they wrote Manufacturing Consent. That is what the media is there to do. The media is there. It's owned by a handful of billionaires, especially since 1996. Which is when Bill Clinton consolidated the media from 50 giant media companies down to 6. And now the reporters and journalists don't come from blue collar backgrounds anymore, and they're not willing to be unpopular and hated by the ruling class, which is what a good reporter is supposed to be. They're supposed to be hated by the ruling class, but now they come from the ruling class and they come from elite universities. Rachel Maddow is an Oxford scholar. That's where they get these people now. Anderson Cooper's a Vanderbilt, for F's sake. That's where these people come from now. The guy who Jeff Bezos handpicked to cover progressive politics for the Washington Post is Dave Weigel, who went to another elite university and led pro-war rallies at Northwestern while he was the editor of their newspaper. So that's the kind of people that are in journalism now. These people who come from, they're class loyal. They have no idea what it's like to be a real working person. And they're from elite universities, and they grew up rich, and they went to boarding schools. That's who you're watching when you're watching CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. When you're reading the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times. And that's why nobody watches these shows. And the people who do are woefully, it's like that old Mark Twain. If you read, maybe it wasn't Mark Twain, maybe it was Will Rogers.
No, that's Twain.
Okay, he said
Right.
if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do, you're misinformed. So go ahead.
We might cover this Sunday. All right. So if you want a bright spot here, there's only so long that you can, in a capitalist system, just keep losing money. So all these media companies are collapsing. Journalists are being laid off and fired by the hundreds and by the thousands. And so there were all these stories about all of a sudden they realized that they're not elites. All of a sudden they found out that their jobs are vulnerable, and they're all, so Weiss this week just, they already went bankrupt, and they just fired like 80% of the people who are left. And they all bombed the Zoom call with the CEO. it's really traumatizing to find out this way that you're fired. My name was even misspelled in the email. Okay, so where were you motherfuckers when this was happening to Detroit? Where were you people when this was happening to blue-collar workers? I say the same thing with Hollywood. We just covered a story about Tyler Perry after seeing what AI can do, these new modules that can do video from text. He stopped an $800 million planned expansion of his studios. He said, we're not going to need these anymore. And he's talking about how, Congress has to intervene to protect these jobs. All these jobs are going to be lost. And hey, maybe some other unions would be more in solidarity with you if, particularly with your industry having such a uniquely visible platform, you would ever been there for them. I've never seen you guys go out there for the auto workers. I've never seen you guys go out there for the communications workers. So now Hollywood's going to burn down because of AI. Nobody cares. Now journalism is burning down because nobody wants to listen to your bullshit anymore. And you're going to complain like you're the oppressed workers. Well, maybe if you had been there, if you had used your platform to highlight the problems of workers, they'd be there for you now. But now nobody cares. Now it's just funny watching you guys crying about losing your jobs.
What, you don't remember all those articles written about the 70,000 healthcare workers fired in one state alone because they wouldn't take an experimental medical treatment with absolutely no long-term studies, and we still don't know what the effects of that treatment is? We still don't know. We won't know for 10 years.
Right.
Where were those articles? None of them were written. Where were the people who say they claim to stand up for workers like Cornel West? That guy tucked his tail, just like all of journalism, and they didn't say a thing about it. Why? Because there was a price to pay, and they're not willing to pay that price. There's a price to pay. I paid a huge price in my life professionally. I have lots of venues that won't work me, canceled me. I have most of my friends, old friends in comedy in Hollywood, not only disown me, but publicly smear me and in the most disgusting ways. Why? Because I was right about COVID and they were wrong. And I can forgive them for being wrong. Just like I can forgive my friend Graham Elman for coming on my show and advocating for mandates, not knowing anything about them. I can forgive him, but they'll never forgive me for being right about COVID. And they turned science, which is the definition of science is to question. They've turned that into a religion that is now you can't question. And if you do, you're a heretic, and it's their moral obligation to now viciously attack you. And anybody I was one of them, anybody who said anything, Joe Rogan, me, Eric Clapton, all he did was tell people that he got what happened to him when he took the vaccine. That's all he said. All he did was he spoke his lived truth. and they called him every name in the book, and all of a sudden it was a racist, and they found black guys that he worked with 30 years ago that say bad things about him. It was unbelievable. So that's the word, and that's why journalists. So they're not doing journalism. You're right. Maybe they would have at least 70,000 healthcare workers in one state alone who would give a shit. Imagine all the workers that lost their jobs because of it. Where's their study? Where's their articles about it? Where's their videos? Where's their news reports? They're nowhere. Nothing. Why? Because they work for the same handful of billionaires who are on board with COVID, just like they're on board with the Ukraine war, just like they're on board with keeping health care from you, just like they're on board with not doing anything about homelessness, just like they're on board with not fixing the subways because they don't take them. And they want you to be on edge. They want you to be on edge.
Board. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say they're on board, too, with throwing Trump in jail. It's with that same certainty that they can tweet out a thing like that, where you just assume that to save democracy, we have to lock Donald Trump in jail. Not for a second considering that actually the exact opposite is true. You throw Trump in jail between now and November 5th, this country is going to blow its top. Blow its fucking top. And our democratic system will never be the same because of it. But that thought does not occur to them.
But they will then blame, like I've been telling you, the billionaire class. If there is an actual civil war in the United States, they benefit. They don't care. The more chaos always benefits the establishment. And so they're pointing their finger at MAGA and Donald Trump, saying they're the ones causing a civil war. Again, every accusation is a confession. That's exactly what they're doing. And by trying to throw Donald Trump in prison and not let people vote for him under the guise of saving democracy, you save democracy by letting people express their will at the ballot box, not by taking it away. They're doing the exact opposite. They're the ones who are stoking a civil war. Try to explain this to somebody who watch MSNBC or CNN, and they'll look at you like like you have 10 heads, right?
Yeah, exactly. I call it the liberal cat stare. That's the term I've coined on my show. They look at you the way a cat looks like a person, right? Like when you're talking to your cat, the cat looks back at you. It knows it's talking to you, but it has no idea what you're saying. So it just kind of looks at you like, you're paying attention to me now.
They're like,
I don't know what you mean, but yeah, like that look, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they just wait for you to get done, and then a second or two goes by, and they'll take a sip of water, and then change the subject. Yeah.
And that's not to say that people who are MAGA and follow Donald Trump don't often have the same kind of obtuseness when it comes to things that have to do with Donald Trump. Like I just spent a couple. I had on Twitter about Venezuela, and
they do. Absolutely.
Donald Trump just admits that he uses his military and the foreign policy of sanctions so we could steal other countries' natural resources, mainly oil, in Syria and Venezuela. And they go, no, he was just saying that Venezuela was going to collapse under its own bad policies of socialism. I go, really? Then why did he sanction them? Why did Donald Trump put crushing economic sanctions on the people of Venezuela if they were going to collapse anyway?
Sure. Yeah, no, they're definitely indoctrinated with their own points of view. In my experience, though, the Trump people will at least try to give you some sort of counter argument.
Correct.
Whereas the libs don't. The libs just look at you funny and change the subject. And that's my experience. I'm not saying that's true across the board, but that's my lived truth.
And I will also say, at least those people who disagree with me on the right don't want to censor me. Mm-hmm. And don't want to shut me up.
Well, yeah, that's a big yes.
And don't want to throw me in jail for what I'm thinking or saying or how I'm voting or for protesting without guns. They don't want to throw me in jail. And they don't want to censor me. So that's a really big deal. Hey, come see us live on tour in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Berlin, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, Cortland, New York, Oakmont, Pennsylvania, right outside Pittsburgh, El Paso, and San Antonio, Texas. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.